Well, good evening, everyone. It is 7 o'clock, and I'd like to welcome you to our program, Shop Talk, History and Memories of the Milwaukee Road Shops in Tomah. My name is Jarrod Roll, and I'm the director of the Monroe County Local History Room and Museum. And I'd like to start by thanking the Sparta United Methodist Church for allowing us to use this space tonight. We're very fortunate that even though it is our wish that everybody can come to the history room for our public programs, we get so many people that come that we can't fit everybody. And so we now are having some programs off-site, and this is one of them. And I'm so glad that all of you came out on this beautiful evening to celebrate something that's very special to our area. So a couple things I'd like to talk to you about before we jump into it. Since we're not at the history room, for those of you that aren't familiar, Monroe County has a history museum. And it's called the Monroe County Local History Room and Museum. We're located at 200 West Main Street, just 2 blocks from here, and we've been at that location since 1993. We were located out at Rolling Hills, north of Sparta, for about several years before that, and we've been around for almost half a century. But our mission is to connect people to Monroe County history in a meaningful way. I can already tell from the conversations that I've been part of and I've observed tonight that your connection tonight to history is meaningful to you. And that's what makes it so exciting for us. How do we connect people to history in a meaningful way? We do that through public programs like the one you're participating in right now. We do that through a research library where we have the county's archives and newspapers and other historic photos and documents for people to reference and to look at and get copies of for their own research. And we also have changing exhibits. Now, speaking of programs, I'll put in an advertisement for our next program that we have, which will be here next month, and it's going to be on the topic of the Ho-Chunk. And a professor from UW-Madison will be here that evening to share his book about the story of the Ho-Chunk and the removal story that they have. But what I'd like to do now is transition to tonight's program. I'm going to read to you an excerpt from an article that was written by Lida Lanier. Now, Lida Lanier, for those of you who are familiar with her, she's from the Norwalk area, and she's been a freelance writer for quite some time. In 1973, she wrote an article about the Milwaukee Road. And in that article, she visits the frog shops, and she documents the work going on there because she wasn't aware what was going on there, and she figured not many other people were either. But it's one wonderful story that she writes to people who aren't necessarily railroad people, but would learn a lot about this important industry. She starts, "Do you remember those old movies? The heroine, a beautiful damsel, is securely tied to the railroad tracks by the evil villain. Billowing thick clouds of black smoke, a train thunders down the tracks. Just as all hope is gone, the handsome hero arrives on the scene, rushes to a nearby switch stand, and throws the lever. Not a moment too soon, the train curves smoothly onto a sidetrack, and the heroine is spared. Unbeknownst to the maiden, it was a lowly frog that enabled the train to make a timely exit onto the siding. So the next time you encounter one set of railroad tracks crossing another, you might try to see if you can recognize Prince Charming disguised as a frog." So at the history room, we never know what's going to walk into the office and bless us and make our day. Well, it wasn't too long ago, it was earlier this year, that Mike Urshley and Barb Urshley of Tomah walked in, and he brought with him a couple of 3-ring binders. These 3-ring binders, in Mike's way, he said, "Well, I don't know if you'd be interested in any of this stuff, but I thought it was pretty important, and I've saved it over the years, and I just didn't want to see it get thrown out." I hope that's an okay impersonation of you, Mike. In all respect. And so we looked at them together, and what they are is they're scrapbooks that were created by someone who worked for that worked for the Milwaukee frog shops for a long time. His name is Jerry Jurdy. And he created these scrapbooks of photographs, newspaper clippings, and other ephemera that Mike preserved and saved for years to make sure that nothing would happen to them. And as he and I looked at them, and me, not knowing a lot about what I was seeing, was asking him questions, he was telling me more and more about what was happening, or what happened at the Milwaukee Road shops. And I said to him, "Mike, This is something that I think more people need to know about, because I didn't realize all that went on there, and that it wasn't just a job. There is something more to that industry and how it helped grow a community and even passed on a legacy through generations. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our topic for tonight, and that is about the Milwaukee Road shops of Tomah. Now, it won't be just me talking all night, because I never worked there. Like many people who are of a younger generation, we drive down or up Highway 12 out of downtown Tomah, and we look to our left and to our right, and we see mostly empty fields. And we aren't aware that for decades, for over a century, that area was humming, buzzing, metal screaming with activity. And so tonight, I'd like to thank Mike, and since Mike, Jim Zingler, and others that have come forward with documentation to help us remember the Tomah frog shops, and for others to learn more about what went on here for over a century. So I will start with a general overview of the history of this site, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mike and then to Jim to share a little bit more in depth from people who were there. Now, I know there are people here who were also there, and it's been so exciting to meet you. And so at the end, I'm going to turn the mic over to you, the audience, and ask if you would please share a story if your family member or you yourself worked for the Milwaukee Road. So for over a century, the Milwaukee Road operated a series of manufacturing and repair shops employing skilled machinists, blacksmiths, electricians, welders, and tinsmiths. We have these wonderful photo collages of people who worked during different eras and in different sections of it. We even have one of the folks working in the office. What's interesting here too is that it's one of the only female employees we have photographs of. They were there. Julia Ford's here tonight. Didn't mean to single you out, but it's so cool that you're here. So their job was to repair and fabricate the rails, the switches, and the crossing assemblies, known as frogs, used on railroads throughout the country. Though the work can be described as dirty, hot, noisy, and dangerous, working for the Tomah rail shops was considered a desirable job, often employing multiple generations of Tomah area people. I've already met some of you that said, I worked for the railroad, my dad worked for the railroad, my grandfather worked for the railroad. And that says something about an industry and a community. In fact, at one time, the Milwaukee Road shops employed over 300 people, and it served as the backbone of the city's industrial activity until it was phased out in the early 1990s. A 1930 article in the Tomah Journal boasts, quote, "The Milwaukee Road shops are a great factor in the industrial life of this community, providing labor for hundreds of men. The removal of any part of this splendid industrial institution would be keenly felt and leave a vacancy of considerable magnitude." Well, tonight we're going to explore the history of the Milwaukee Road shops, the origin of the shops, like why was Tomah chosen to be home of the shops, and how they played a role in developing Tomah's economy and the lasting legacy that it has on Monroe County and this part of Wisconsin. Now, before we can talk about these shops, we have to talk about the railroad itself. We have to remember that as our country grew, the railroads grew as well. They grew in tandem, some going before the others. And here in Monroe County, we were very fortunate that a rail line came through here relatively early. Wisconsin became a state in 1848. All right, nice, you remember the elementary history. Good. 1848. And it wasn't much longer that surveyors were beginning to look at a route that could connect Milwaukee to La Crosse. Now again, I'm not going to go deep into this history because it itself is very rich. And when I call tonight the Milwaukee Road is really shorthand. That name evolved over time. There was the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul. It was the Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul, and Pacific. And then it was other things. But we're going to call it the Milwaukee Road. That's what it refers to for tonight. But I'll I'll zoom in here. So Monroe County, just to put this in perspective, Monroe County became its own county in 1854. 1854, we split off from La Crosse. This map, in fact, wasn't caught up to the times yet. We didn't have that dividing line there, but it was just around the same time. And so by 4 years later, the railroad is completed. And because of that, because it passes through our county and Tomah, we become connected virtually to the rest of the world. And that brings with it movement of people, movement of business and commerce and money, and it really establishes us and grows us and gives us a hope of a brighter future. The map that I have up there now is from 1881, and it is a map of the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul railroads at the time. The years that followed the American Civil War saw in Wisconsin an era of a boom of railroad construction. During the Civil War, we saw that the North had this great advantage because we had the railroad. We can move people, we can move goods, we can move what we needed fast. And so the railroad was the future, and the railroad boomed. We can see that there's all these lines on this map. The red ones are the ones that are owned by the Milwaukee Road at the time. And Tomah, early on, was becoming a focal point of potential routes. This map is dated slightly earlier, but what I wanted to show you on here is that in 1868, the West Wisconsin Railroad opened, and that's this one right here. And it was the first great railroad to reach up through the Northwest to St. Paul and Lake Superior. And when that happened, now Tomah is becoming kind of like a spur of activity where not just one railroad, but two and more are starting to pass through and to connect. And this is very important because success draws other success. As Tomah and the railroad grew, new people would move to town, new businesses would be established, and the community would grow. This is a wonderful image. I know you can't see it well from where you are, but it's an 1870 bird's eye view illustration of Tomah, Wisconsin. And just to give you some orientation, down here is what we call the downtown of Tomah. This is like South Superior Ave. Down here is where the rail activity was. This is Superior, so we're running this way is going north actually. It's not to scale because it's an artist illustration. But what's really neat about it is it shows us how Tomah was growing at the time and bustling and has rail activity. But there aren't any shops there yet. Not shops like we can think of them. They're coming. In 1871, Tomah saw itself as the focal point of 5 great railroads: the Milwaukee Road, the West Wisconsin, the Northwestern, the Illinois Central, and the Wisconsin Valley. An undated Tomah article that I have from 1871 reads, quote, "It is conceded on all sides that Tomah is the natural railroad center of the Northwest and cannot fail to become in a few years the most important freight and shipping point." That was in 1871. By that time, however, Tomah had not only the Milwaukee Road, as I had mentioned, but it also had the Wisconsin Valley Railroad as well. And Tomah served as the headquarters for the Valley Road. So just, again, from where you're seated, you might have a hard time making this out, so I'll do my best to describe it. But you can see the big X. Right here, this is the Milwaukee Road, and Tomah's right down here is the red square, and then this is the Valley line coming through. And what that, of course, today, that's 173, but it's passing through Valley Junction, going on up here, and then on up to the pineries and up to where they're cutting and harvesting all that wood. And that wood's coming down this way, so you have Goodyear making their headquarters in Tomah. So you see this industry is growing, and when you have a profitable industry, it attracts more industry. So I like this because this is not in our archives. I hope we get them someday from them. But the Wisconsin Valley Railroad envelope stationery says Tomah, Wisconsin, and I included that because it just shows that we were an important railroad point even before we had shops here. So the building of the Valley Line in 1874 opened up our area for lumber operations, including the Goodyear Lumber Company, and they made their headquarters in Tomah, as well as established a planing mill. That's very important too. From Tomah, the Milwaukee Road took the wood to markets everywhere. So we have the pineries, or the woods up north. We have the railroads moving it. We have the planing mill. All of that going through Tomah really solidified it as a railroad center. The city was poised to become the center for even more railway industry. Then something big happened. In 1887, in Watertown, Wisconsin, at that point, the Milwaukee Road shops, the railroad shops, were located, but they burned. And instantly, the Tomah City Council met to offer land to the company as an inducement to bring the yards to this city, to Tomah. We were competing against Portage, La Crosse, Sparta, and Watertown. They all wanted it. They wanted the shops located there. They knew if the shops were located there, there always would be important. There always will be jobs in industry. Well, even with cash incentives being offered by the others, Tomah won out. On September 14th, 1889, it was announced in the headlines that Tomah would get the bridge works due to the city being located at the junction of two principal divisions of the Milwaukee Road and very conveniently located to the lumber region. I'm just quoting something here. So again, just to clarify, this is not the frog shops yet. These are the bridge works. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means. So this is a close-up picture from what's called a Sanborn fire insurance map. And they're wonderful maps that we have at the history room. And they document properties in city centers. This one, of course, is Tomah. And what we see here we have Superior Avenue. And then right as you pass over the tracks on the left, shows up Bridgeworks. It's not very detailed, but we can see that it was there. That's one of the first buildings now on that property. And just keep that in mind as we see this map expand. The bridge yards comprised of a large office and a factory building and employed dozens of men. This plant constructed the wooden culverts and bridges. They also built depots here and storehouses and other buildings that could be built in place and shipped where needed for the Milwaukee Road. But that's not all. Our story doesn't stop there. It just keeps on continuing. In 1907, 16 years later, Tomah would receive what one journalist at the time said, quote, the biggest boom in its history. When in 1907, the Milwaukee Road moved their frog and metal shops from Milwaukee to Tomah. A new brick building would be erected on the railroad property north of the bridge shop that we just saw, along with the power plant. And they estimated at the time that it would bring in 100 new families to Tomah. And these frog shops would employ up to 150 men. So at the time, this is a big deal that we were chosen over Milwaukee for the home for these shops, and that jobs, good paying jobs, would be available to the people of this region. And I don't know if these guys knew at the time, but their sons and their grandsons may end up working there too. Now, something that I'm going to clarify for you, just because, and again, most of you, and we'll identify you a little later, but most of you probably already know this, that at the frog shops, we did not build trains here. Tomah did not build trains. That was done elsewhere. What was done here was the construction of frogs. Now, let's clarify what a frog is. The frog is the heart of the crossing assembly, a special arrangement of rails that lets a train pass from one set of tracks to another. Frogs are used at crossings and where two rails merge into one, and in railroad yards when moving cars. So I have this picture up there because, of course, people will ask, well, why are they called frogs? And I dug into it, I researched it, I asked old railroad men this question, and I've gotten two answers. And one is, well, it's named after this part of a horse's hoof, because they resembled it, and that was called the frog, or because it actually looks like a frog that's jumping. I don't know. You'll have to share with me, you guys and gals, what you think it is a little bit later. But it's called a frog. This is what we mean. This is one of the main things that was built out there for decades. So right now, the entire operation occupied 25 acres of storage yards and buildings and employed 150 men. So this is pre-World War II, even pre-World War I, like around that era. In the 1912 Wisconsin Industrial Review, they wrote this. They said that the Milwaukee Road shops, this is in 1912, the shops in Tomah had 3 separate departments, all working together to meet the needs of the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad, or the Milwaukee Road. The bridge works, the frog shop, and the cement working plant. So this is another Sanborn map. This one happens to be from 1922, and I circled the different shops here. So here we have the bridge works, which came in 1891. We saw that on the earlier one. This one gets a little more descriptive, shows the size of it. Then you have the frog shops coming in 1907, approximately. And then they add a concrete shop in 1913, which then will be expanded at some point, and then eventually will not be in such great operation later. But at this time, it was. So they're growing, but growth isn't always easy. And we have to remember that what we experienced in Tomah is reverberating from what's happening in the rest of the country, because the Milwaukee Road is a national company employing thousands of people all over the United States. So here's the frog shop, and you can kind of see some of the operations here, some of the cement culverts that were manufactured. But there were a series of strikes that were happening, so I don't want to make it sound like it was just constant upward movement all the time. Sometimes there were some steps back because of what was happening through these growing stages. At one point, this article said they were bringing in Italian workers to relieve them, which is very curious. And later on, of course, we have the Great Railroad Strike of 1922, which was a national event, but it was felt locally as well. And this article, actually it's more of a want ad in the Tomah newspaper of that year. It states that they're actually looking to fill permanent positions for machinists, boilermakers, blacksmiths, and metalworkers, electricians by the hour, 70 cents an hour. And they say that their need is to replace men who are on strike against the decision of the United States Railroad Labor Board. So I don't know who took that up, but it wasn't very long that the men who were working in Tomah went back to work, because another big advancement happened at the Tomah shops. In 1927, this was a big year for the Tomah shops. In June, the Tomah Journal reported that the railroad was to build a, quote, larger and better equipped concrete shop to meet the increasing concrete needs of the railroad in Tomah. And this would include manufacturing all the culvert pipes and the other concrete products that used for track maintenance. But then just a few weeks later, another article in July of 27 stated that Tomah would be soon adding a rail reclamation shop to its grounds. The entire plant would occupy 4 acres of the grounds. It would employ, at first, 30 people. Now, in case you were wondering, they did explain what does that mean, a rail reclamation shop. So this is how they described it to people reading the Tomah Journal that year in 1927. They said, the functions of a rail reclamation plant are to recondition second-hand rails removed from the tracks on account of worn ends. These rails are sawed off, straightened, drilled for splice bolts, and classified for the service they are best fitted for. So now that operation is moving to Tomah. And every time an improvement like this is made, it makes Tomah more and more important to the railroad. I really like in 1928, there's an article that states that the Milwaukee Road shops employed over 300 men. 300 men. And they were managed by 15 supervisors. 13 of whom were alumni of Tomah High School. Now, we realize that in late 1929, our country entered what we call now the Great Depression. And this, of course, would have an effect on our nation's railroads, and Tomah is no different. In July of 1930, the Milwaukee Road had to lay off most of its workforce that year. The La Crosse Tribune author who covered the story is quoted as saying, quote, "The laying off of so many men for an indefinite time will, it is expected, cause hard times in this locality, especially among the businesses, as families struggle to get and purchase their bare necessities." Later that year, employees and their families in the greater Tomah community endured several weeks of uncertainty as railroad officials considered relocating the Milwaukee Road shops. So these decisions are coming down from up high where it's not the same for them, and I don't want to throw anybody under the train when it comes to this, but they're looking at the bottom line and they're deciding, okay, we're hemorrhaging money. Where can we save money? Let's move things out of this community and put them over in this community. Let's downsize this, because that's how we're going to keep this business going. And so for a while during this era, they were considering moving the shops out. Now we know that didn't happen. We're thankful for that. In 1932, the Tomah shops added a new and just as important repair department. Some of the things they repaired were Jordan ditchers, this machine that you see on the tracks that would excavate along the sides of the track. So those were brought to Tomah and repaired. And I know many of you are going to be able to talk more about that. And then also, so additional labor would be needed for these improvements. And this would bring encouraging news to Tomah during the Depression. During the 1940s, the rail shops continued to do a variety of repair work on equipment. It included the repair of motor cars, the sawing of rail, the painting of yard markers, and switch signals, and a great amount of welding and concrete work, in addition to already acting as a disbursement point for stores material. So these are some really neat pictures that were published in 1950. And I'll back up for a second, just read to you the captions because you can't see them. They're pretty neat. So this one here says, David McFarland works on a track motor car in the machinery repair division. You see there's somebody down there. And then here's E.A. Sundstrom, Tomah District Manager, and Clayton Hemsey, Superintendent of the Tomah Frog Shop. I don't have glasses on. And they inspect targets of manually operated switches. We're going to try this one. All right. Here we have Herman Protz, who watches closely as the planing machine shakes two switch points. This machine is powered by a 75 horsepower motor. And then a veteran employee, Paul Teskey, assembles shop-made switch lanterns. It's kind of hard to make out here what he's holding on to. So, the reason why I'm including this, because I was amazed, because I always just heard them called the frog shops. But there was so much more that was going on there, requiring so many different skill sets and operations. During the 1940s, the rail rehabilitation shop at the Tomah shops was expanded in 1950 as the Milwaukee Road moved its operations that were going on in Savannah, Illinois, to Tomah, which greatly expanded the rail reclamation operation at the Tomah site. So again, now they're growing, they're consolidated in Tomah. As the principal storage and distribution point for maintenance of wave materials and the manufacture of track switches and frogs, Tomah was a logical location for the rail mill. So these pictures here can show you the different stages of rail coming into the yard, then being bent, being sawed or cut, being re-drilled again, and then it'll be graded. I'm simplifying this because some of you did this. And then it would be regraded so they can get used again. Not all rail is equal. It can't be used the same everywhere. It has to be used in certain applications. So they would sort it here. So again, the bad rail comes in, useful rail goes out. That was done here. So, even with the addition, okay, so in the frog shops, let's talk about the frog shops a little bit now. In that same article that Lida Lanier wrote, she has some captions by these photos, and I'd like to read them because I think she did a wonderful job describing what she saw as someone who wasn't part of the railway business, but as just an observer. So, this picture up here, she writes, "Blacksmith welder Arnold Storkel belongs to a railroad family." Remember, a lot of families did this. "He has worked in the frog shop since 1936, and 2 Storkel sons are also employed there. Here, he puts the finishing touches on a crossing assembly. Since every crossing is different, every assembly is custom made." Now we see a frog. "The frog is the heart of the crossing assembly, a special arrangement of rails that lets trains pass from one set of tracks to another." Lida says, "No one is certain how the frog got its name, but its X shape vaguely resembles a swimming frog. There are 3 frogs in this view, one is obscured by the welder, but complex crossing assemblies may contain as many as 8. And this is a neat picture of inside the building. "The interior of the frog shop is cavernous, but it has to be to handle frogs up to 28 feet long and weighing upwards of a ton. The overhead crane and lift trucks move the massive parts from station to station. In the foreground, Superintendent Frank Reese and shop foreman Gerald Jarrod examine a blueprint. The shop has prints for every crossing along the Milwaukee Road." Jerry Larson operates the multiple drill press. This mammoth press, the youngest machine in the shop, can drill a dozen holes at a time. Look closely and you can see the X-shaped frog lying on its side at the base of the drill. The frog point fills the left-hand side of the X. So I spent a little bit of time talking in general terms of what was going on there, because I'm going to turn it over to some of you to talk from firsthand experience. But something as the county historian that it's important to me about this story is not just what was happening in the shops, but the effect that having this industry in Tomah had on the community. We've already talked about how multiple generations of people worked for the shops, and that they were good paying jobs. And it meant something to work for the railroad. It's kind of fun, up in the upper left corner is an article from 1914 talking about that the frog shops had their own baseball team, and they played against some guys down in Camp Douglas, and the frog shop boys did win, 4-2. Something else as well, the Milwaukee Railroad Women's Clubs. The Milwaukee Railroad Women's Club. So at the history room, someone donated to us the several archival volumes of the Milwaukee Road's women's clubs in our area. They were active. And this is really neat too. So this is Depression era. At that time, they had 155 voting members in Tomah. So how many families is that? If you have 155 women part of this club, you have at least that many men that are working. And what this organization did is they would raise funds for people in need, including people who worked for the railroad. They would do fundraisers. They would do business or community improvement projects, just like a lot of other social clubs. They also did charity work too. But again, it was because of the railroad operations in Tomah that this club existed, these friendships were made, and our community could thrive. One other thing I think is very telling about the effect of the shops in Tomah is that so John Rainier, he worked for the railroad for 60 years, I believe it said, before he retired. And so he was made honorary chairman of Railroad Day in Tomah. The railroad was so important that there was something called Railroad Day. And Mike Bean brought in today the Milwaukee Road Appreciation Day button from 1967. I wonder if they're connected, if there's an outgrowth of it. But Railroad Appreciation Day, now, if I can read that, it says, "The observance of Railroad Day has been under consideration by the Chamber of Commerce for some time. The Milwaukee Road shops have provided the main source of employment in the community and have been an important factor in the economic life of the city for many years. And it's their way of expressing appreciation to the officials of the Milwaukee Road for the part they have played in the Tomah community life. So, not only was there this Railroad Day, but I also wanted to point out that this guy, who's the head of the railroad here in Tomah, he was also president of the Chamber of Commerce and was involved with the Downtown Improvement Association of Tomah. So you can see how it's all connected together. And something kind of fun I just have to share with you as a kind of a footnote. So I met Mike and Barb Urshley a couple years ago when they brought to us these wonderful plastic blow-molded Tomah Christmas lights. These were these big lights that used to hang on Superior Avenue in the 50s and 60s and then into the 70s. Well, Mike saved them from being destroyed, and he brought them to us asking if the History Museum would like to keep them. And of course we said yes. We fell in love with them. And we did an exhibit of them. This was a couple of years ago, and I hope some of you had a chance to see it, but that was Mike and Barb who saved those and then gave them to us now to save for everyone. But one thing that's really neat is that when we were researching that exhibit, what we discovered is that who paid for those plastic blow-molded lights to hang in downtown Sparta back in the 50s? It was the Chamber of Commerce Downtown Improvement Club this guy was involved with at the railroad. So it's just a fun double connection now with Mike. So again, it was more than just a place to work. More than just a place to work. One other thing, so Hannah Schulze, who also works at the History Room, she's our crack genealogist and researcher. She looked in the 1930 census, and something that's really neat is that railroad families were close. Not just close because they were friends, but close geographically. This is a census page from the city of Tomah from 1930, and what do we see? We see that all the men are working for the railroad. They're all working for the railroad, and they live right next to each other. The census takers walk door to door. Where do you work? Railroad shops, railroad company, railroad yards, railroad shops, railroad depot. So there was communities formed around this way to earn a living. So then it kind of brings us now into a more modern era, an era that it's more difficult to research, honestly, for us. And you, obviously, are living history of the more modern era. As speaking to several of you before our program started, this would apply to your era. But we have to remember that in America, the railroad itself was changing. The railroad was changing. I want to show a picture. I know it's difficult for you to see from where you are, but this is a map that shows the rail lines in Wisconsin from 1860 down to 1970. And what you can see, of course, is this heyday right around there. That's 1910 and 1920. This is when they were employing 300 people, by the way, right in this era. But then the rail lines there's fewer of them there because of consolidations and sell-offs and more I can talk about. So even with the addition and expansion of activities at the Tomah shops, let me back up. There were periodic layoffs and closings as a result of the Milwaukee Road weathering its own economic challenges. Between 1974 and 1977, the Milwaukee Road lost $100 million, and the company filed for its third bankruptcy in 42 years on December 19, 1977. The economic challenges faced by the company reverberated locally to us. In the 1970s, the Milwaukee Road had to furlough employees, including at the Tomah maintenance shops, for months at a time. Additional layoffs would happen in 1982, reducing the number of employees down to 43. The Sioux Line merged with the Milwaukee Road in 1985, and then was acquired by Canadian Pacific later in 1990. In that year, the shops employed 35 people. The Frog Shop closed in 1992. Most of the contents of the building were either moved out or scrapped. And at that time, about 25 people were working there. The Frog Shop building came down in November of 2000. At that time, there were 3 people employed there repairing frogs until September. The material division closed down in March of 2000 with 4 people working up to the end, and the building was torn down in November 2000. So we have, what's interesting here is you have the roundhouse. So these were like just signs of things to come. So here's the old roundhouse that came down in December of '82. There's another building that came down in 1990. I just want to share a short video. I'm very grateful to Jim Zingler. Jim Zingler, I'll give a chance. I'd love to have him share a little bit about his experience as well. But we're going to hear his voice for 6 minutes because he gave us a video that he had the foresight to take, taking us through a last tour of the Tomah rail yard shops. You may not be able to hear his voice loud and clear, but we did put some words on the bottom to follow along.
At the Tomah CP Rail shop, looking at what used to be the frog shop. It's scheduled to be torn down in October of this year. So I'm going to make a little video. Right next to it on the left-hand side is a storeroom. To the left of that is the office building. The office building is where I work. They're not going to tear that down, but the storeroom's going to come down in October. The tracks are going to come out probably next month. So there won't be much left here. The little white thing along the side is a shop, lunchroom, and restroom. The frog shop closed in '92. At the time, there was about 25 people working there. Since that time, there's been 3 people working there just repairing frogs. And they're scheduled to be released at the end of September. The material division had closed up end of March of year 2000. At the time we closed, there was 4 people working. Now I'm inside the storeroom. There's not much left in here, just a few items that are being offered for sale. There's not much in here anymore. It used to be full of material racks. Material on. Did the receiving and shipping from this building. Safety sign in the storeroom. Last injury was in '96. There's the old sign that was out in front of the shops. It's put up after CP bought it, the railroad was sued. This is the south side of the frog shop. The little white lean-to in front here is the foreman's office. The last foreman in the frog shop was Jarrod Roll. See, this is the date that the shop was built, 1907, and lasted to the year 2000, so it lasted 93 years. Inside the shop, there's not much left in here. Most of the machinery's been removed. It was removed and scrapped in '92 when most of the frog repair portion was closed up. The building's 110 feet wide, 300 feet long. This is the center bay. Up there you can see the overhead crane. The last operator of that crane was Dick Schultz. one time there was over 100 people working in this shop on 3 shifts. Here's a rail bender, horizontal type. Here's the hand car that was out in front of the shops on display for probably about 25 years. The wood had gotten all rotten, and Don Egan, who still works here, volunteered to rebuild it. And did a really good job on it. It's going to be put on display probably up in Gillette Park as soon as the city council decide where it's going to go. To ask, what is a frog? It allows the train to go from one track to the next. Standing at the west door, looking east. There's not much left in here, pretty well cleaned out. Still have another rail bender. This is the Quonset hut storage building. That building's going to stay. The engineering department's still storing some material in there. Behind the crane. The gantry crane was moved up here from Milwaukee in the early 70s. That's going to be taken down the same time as the frog shop.
So just a few months later, Jim will return to this site and he's going to document the demolition of these buildings. And while we don't have that clip for tonight, I'm very grateful to Jim that he had the foresight to go out and do this. And we're thankful that he brought it into the history room just a few days ago and allowed us to share it with you all tonight. So there's a picture of it, November 2000. So this site was the site of many lives, many hours spent, a lot of sweat, a lot of smoke, a lot of noise, a lot of memories. Today as we drive by it, and it looks like this, we don't remember it like this, we remember it like this now. What I'd like to do in this time is turn over the presentation for a little bit and ask Mike Urshley just to take us on a little tour of the frog shops and the grounds itself. Looking at a series of photos taken in 1982. And Mike, I can pass the phone to you, or a microphone to you, and you can do it from there if you like. Otherwise, you can come up. It's up to you. You want to do it from there? Okay. All right. Everyone, let's do my drawing. When I asked him, I said, Mike, you are going to be willing to come up and share these? This is what you did with me. He sat me down and he's like, okay, Jarrod. This is this place, and this is what it was like there. This is this is what it was like there. I'm like, Mike, wait, slow down. Like, I'm trying to take notes. But I thought, I need you to do that now for a larger crowd. So, Mike, thank you for being gracious and sharing with us a little bit about, again, what was the building used for, what went on there, and what will be your memories of that place?
Of course, you have to remember I was quite young when I did this. But this is the old frog shop, and this is where all the repair work went on. And I was working with one of the Sturp brothers, and my father was about 50 feet away. So any of the work that I produced that day, I heard about it that night. And there was a couple of occasions where I made a mistake or two. But every gentleman in there was a lot older than me. And it was kind of intimidating to have all these older gentlemen creative in the way they talk to you and what you're allowed to do. When I started there, I wasn't good enough to walk with them. I had been 2 steps behind.
Mike, can you tell us what year did you start working there and in which position?
In 1970. I was over to the right out in the field. I was building panels.
All right, so Mike, I'm just gonna take you through some photos. If you just wanna tell us a little bit about, I mean, I do have them identified thanks to Jim Ziegler, brought in an additional set of photos that had identification on the bottom. But if there's anything you'd like to add to what we see here as to what went on and how this all played into the operations of the shop?
This was just storage of material that was headed into the frog shop, and right in front of us, the white shed was the drill shed, where they used on occasion to do some drilling in, but otherwise the material was going through the west door.
There's actually a hole in that wall, Mike, remember?
Yes,
Where there's
for
shut
longer
wall.
pieces of rail.
So what's all in the yard that we see in front of us there, Mike? You able to make that out?
This is, on the left there are some frogs, but it's a lot of assorted material that go into that. We almost should have Mike Bean up here, because he's a clerk, and he would know about.
Mike, would you want to come up? I have two microphones here, one for Mike and one for Mike. You can see right here in my spot if you like. Right. Everybody please welcome Mike Bean.
Well, the skids look like they were, parts for frogs, don't they, Mike?
Yes, that's what I believe it is.
Yeah, parts of frogs.
I'll advance, and if there's anything more you want to say, let me know.
Well, this is the jig where they made track panels. Right, Mike?
That was my first job, only we didn't have this fancy setup.
No,
But you're building track panel, 39-foot pieces of rail on ties, complete, ready to go, that they ship out for derailment.
track panels.
Okay. All right, Pam,
They put about 5 track panels in each con,
keep talking,
and
Mike,
we
please.
cable them down,
Just hold it right up there.
and we cable them down. The track panels are up, kind of off to the left up there. See that big pile of black up there? That's track panels that are waiting to be shipped out.
Okay. It says west side of office. I don't know if there's anything more to be said about it.
Well, those are odd-sized points, different lengths and different sizes. We very seldom picked them up. I mean, every once in a while, they came up the bat and we had to go get them. The majority of the frogs and points were on the dock. That's what we worked with. And
This is more-
that's my handiwork,
What?
sorting turnout plates. I sorted all that.
We sorted it out.
Sorted out, size and,
So what was stored in the storage shed?
well,
Here's the-
That was miscellaneous material that was being shipped into boxcars. The track on the left there were the boxcars, and you could go around towards the frog shop and drive up on there.
that's a 15 track, that's a loading, unloading track. And there's frogs and points stockpiled there to pick up, as your requisition called for. Scrap deck,
What's all this?
that looks like a pile of track bolts.
Track bolts?
I think they were, used ones. They were gonna be sorted out and reused.
Sorted out and reused. Okay. So lumber shed. What went on in the lumber shed?
Just storage.
Storage?
That was just,
By that point,
Yeah, just storage when we were there.
paint shed.
That was just storage also. That was probably the first building to come down, wasn't it, Mike?
yes, it was.
Our house.
Maintenance of way equipment shop.
Motor car shop.
Motor car shop. Okay.
We did track machinery. Mike, you were on some of that, weren't you?
Yes, I worked there several years.
Yeah.
So tell us more about what went on in this building.
They did motor cars repair for the sections, but then they got into more or less the equipment that worked out on their track. Because as time went by, the equipment was getting bigger and bigger, and they needed room where they could put it up on stands.
ballast regulators, tampers, big stuff.
All right, so this is just a picture of the yard that we saw earlier. Again, you can see how much space it occupied and what it is now. So, gentlemen, again, I'm going to give a chance to pass around a microphone to people, but first, thank you for that. Can you just share a little bit about, like what did it mean to work for the Milwaukee Road? What did that mean to work for them? What did it mean for you, Mike?
Well, you were recognized in town as having one of the premium jobs. People kind of respected you for that, or your families, and there was generation after generation that worked there. So it was a good place to work, the benefits were good.
Dirty and sweaty sometimes.
Dirty and sweaty sometimes,
You
isn't it?
bet.
Smelly,
Yeah.
but it was just a different upbringing. I should have maybe went on to college, but instead I chose this. And it was a good life, but there was lots of ups and downs with it, and the railroad's still going that way. They've downsized so far now that they don't have enough employees. But the technology and things is really neat. The safety part is neat. There was no safety back then.
Do each of you want to share, do you have a short story that you will always remember about a day at work?
Not any one particular.
Okay,
There's a lot of them.
okay.
Question,
Yes,
just above that red spot, the veterinary clinic, is that where the roundhouse was?
Where's that now?
right, so the question is right here, this was where the roundhouse was
Yeah,
located.
that's the roundhouse slab.
Yep, this is a slab now. Right, so I'm just gonna back up to this here. So this was still a slab at that point, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
It's kinda hard to tell from here, because it came down at a certain point.
See, we came off Superior Avenue driving into the rail mill. We drove around the backside of that slab, and then there was a parking up there by the rail mill.
Okay. Very good. Is there, what I can do now, thank you gentlemen, by the way, for sharing. Thank you, Mike. All right, so I had the benefit of being able to meet several of you already that have worked for the railroad, and you are here tonight, and I'm going to give a chance to you to share a little bit. I would like to recognize Jim Zingler. Jim Zingler, as he described it, was the last man out the door. And again, we saw his video that he shot. But I did ask Jim if he could just share a little bit about in the end, as the Milwaukee Road transitioned and began to be phased out, just describe that process a little bit, because that's the part of the program that I wasn't as aware of. So, Jim, would you be able to talk a little bit about just what's important for us to remember about that time?
Well, it started with the Sioux Line and Milwaukee merger in '85. The equipment shop eventually moved to Fond du Lac. The equipment shop in what was in Tomah was the old lumber shop. It was built like 1890 or 1887. And the one in Fond du Lac was vacant, was built in 1960. It was a locomotive roundhouse. It was a good-sized building, it had an overhead crane. So the decision by the railroad was to move the equipment shop over there. And it was about 30 or 35 people working in the Tomah equipment shop. I think there was 7 or 8 went to Fond du Lac to work in the shop there. The rest were furloughed or they took a separation allowance. So then the frog shop continued on, and into the late 80s and 90s, the frog shop had a lot of work. In fact, there was a short period of time, there was a second shift put on. The work was caused by the single track project between Minneapolis and Milwaukee. You had to make an awful lot of switches and turnouts, and all the components that went with that. And that employed the materials department had to continue working. They had a lot of material to ship out. and the rail mill was still cropping rail. It was no longer drilling the rail, they just cut off the bolt hole ends and straightened the rail, and that rail was shipped to Wabasha, Minnesota to be welded in quarter-mile lengths. Well, that meant double handling of the rail. So Wabasha installed a machine to do the cropping there. That eliminated the Tomah rail mill. And it was about 8 or 9 part-time positions with that. In the meantime, the Sioux Line had a frog shop in Fond du Lac, and that operation was combined with the one in Tomah. The one in Fond du Lac was quite small, but it brought some additional work for the frog shop in Tomah. In fact, it was a large planer moved from Fond du Lac to Tomah, and for making switch points. And then the Sioux Line, or the Sioux Line was bought out by Canadian Pacific, and they had a huge frog shop in Winnipeg, Canada. It was probably maybe 7 or 8 times as big as the operation we had in Tomah, and it all modern equipment. Our newest machine in Tomah frog shop was purchased in 1955. Most of the equipment there was from the 1920s. But the equipment in the Winnipeg shop was all at least maybe 20 years old at the most. So they could do the work very easily without any increase in force. So that drove the nail in the coffin for the frog shop. The material department continued on for a few years, shipping out material until somebody got the bright idea to buy it direct and have it shipped right to the user. So it didn't come to Tomah, it went right to the end user. So that pretty much closed up the shop. I worked there for 39 years. My great-grandfather worked there. My grandfather worked there. My father worked there. My brother worked Milwaukee Road, although he didn't work in Tomah. So I walked out the door in June of 2001. My last 3 years there, I worked for purchasing department. I purchased track material and had it shipped direct to the end user in the U.S. That's about my story.
Jim, you've given me quite a job. I'm going to have to replay this video and transcribe word for word what you just told us, because that is the best history of the latter years of the Milwaukee Road that anybody's going to get here in Tomah. So thank you. Thank you. It means a lot. There are many of you who have stories to tell as well. And first, what I'd like to do, if I could, if you worked for the Milwaukee Road, whether it be in the shops or in some capacity for the Milwaukee Road, or you had family that did, would you please stand? If you worked for the Milwaukee Road, or you had family that worked for the Milwaukee Road, could you please stand? Wow. I'd say almost half of you. I'm going to clap for you. Thank you. All right, so there were some folks that I met here earlier, and I just want to make sure we get a chance to talk. So Julia Ford, Julia, right over here. I'm putting some of you on the spot, but you'll be fine. So Julia, would you please share when you worked for the Milwaukee Road and the years? Because, as you saw in those photos, there's not a lot of women pictured there, but here we have one. So can you tell us? Here you go. You can just stay right there. That's fine. Mm-hmm.
I don't have the.
There you go.
All right, thank you. I can't remember exactly the years that I worked there. Jim probably could tell you as well as I could, but I was a steno clerk, and I did a lot of work for Don Reed, typing purchase orders. And I forget when the Sioux Line bought it out, I think they abolished my position, and I had to be on a roster, and certain hours you're supposed to be home in case they call you for a shift. And of course, when I got my call, it was not during those hours, and it was to go to St. Paul and work there. And I said I didn't want to be a weekend wife, so I told them to take me off the roster, and I took my severance pay.
What was that like working in a place where there's mostly men? Was that intimidating at first to apply for that job, or?
Not really.
No? Okay. Well, thank you for coming out tonight. Julia also brought with her a photo album that is it's quite a treasure of history. And it is a photo album, literally, and it's only one of two that exist that we are aware of, correct? That Don Reeb, who took photographs for the Milwaukee Road that he created. It's up here for when we disperse after the program. I invite you to come up here and take a look at it. Just be very careful when you handle it. And then we have other items up here too that Mike and Barb Urshley brought in, and Jim Zingler brought in. And again, I'm going to do a plug here, but we are the county's history museum, and we value the history that you have saved, whether it be up here, a story that you have, or it be something tangible that you have, like photographs, or a helmet, or whatever it was that you saved and held on to from your time working for the Milwaukee Road. We would love to have the honor of preserving that for the future. So you can see me about that. But anybody else who worked for the Milwaukee Road that would like to, for the shops in particular, would like to share a story about what it was like to work there, I'm going to come around the corner. All right. Please say your name and what you did, or your name and the years that you worked there and what you did.
Well, I'm P.W. Stevenson. That's my buddy P.W. Clark there. And a lot of people thought we were brothers, but trust me, we aren't. When they were showing pictures up there earlier, they were showing the jig for making track panels outside of the shops. And I was the foreman for that crew building track panels for several years, and a lot of times in the cold of the winter. And we would work a night shift because of the fact that we needed a crane, and we would use the crane from the shops to do our job. And one night, will always stick in my head, there was a derailment over across the river. Pat, you were probably working on that derailment. And those guys got it all cleared and ready for a new track to be laid down. And these track panels, what these track panels were for, they were stored in Tomah, and then if they had a derailment somewhere, loaded them on the cars, shipped them there, and laid them out. Well, I think Jim Eli might have been the supervisor at that time. He sent these other poor guys home after they had the track area cleared, and they sent me and my crew over there that night to lay the track panels so that that track was ready to have the ballast put in the morning and surfaced. And the one thing I'll always remember about that derailment was that it was about 20 or 30 below, like it always is, right, PW? And one of the cars that had derailed was full of molasses. And there was molasses in the ditch. So you can imagine what it was like when we got out and went to go there to start laying track panels, and we walked in molasses about halfway to our knees. That is my memory of the Tomah shop.
Okay, I'm the other PW from the railroad, Pat Clark, and he was talking about track panels, and they showed them there. But for those of you that didn't work on the railroad, to understand what a track panel was, and they're fairly non-existent anymore, but put your hands up if anybody had a Lionel or a railroad HO or a Lionel train set when they were kids. Now you remember what you put together? You put together these little sections of track. Those were track panels, but in real life they were 39 feet long with 24 ties, right? And that was a skinny tie. So they stocked these up, and when there's a derailment, they shoved everything off to the side, and they put those panels in to to rebuild the track, so.
131 pound panels.
Well, 131, 132, 110s, but they were 39 feet long, and they were shipped out on flat cars or gondolas a lot of times. They would get like 8 of them in a gondola, and they were put in for emergencies. And then you'd have to come and shift the rail later, so your joints wouldn't be right across. That's another story. But the panels, I always describe them as like your Lionel toy sections of track, only life size. 39 feet long, 24 ties, 18.5-inch spacing.
Explain what a 131 pound rail is.
Well,
And what a 132 pound.
when you talk about rail, back in the day, they had 90-pound rail, then they went to 100, 131, 132. That's how much a rail, 3 feet of rail, 132-pound rail, 3 feet weighed 132 pounds.
Why did we switch from 131 to 132?
That I don't remember. They had a little bit of different bolt pattern.
Because the 131 had more tendency for end brakes in cold weather.
Because the bolt was closer to the end. That's right, 132. Just the exact same rail, different bolt hole patterns. Thank you, Patrick.
I'll make mine a little bit shorter there. I started down in the railroad as out on the gang. Actually, we abandoned the rail from Camp Douglas all the way to Wisconsin Dells. We walked from there, Holmes Pikes, making it a single track, yeah. Jim Zingler was my supervisor, which is a very good supervisor. I enjoyed working with him. I was like a floater when we got done working on the gangs. I got hired at the shops. I got to help switch cars in and out the yard. Trimmer Tom, he built a tree stand for me on the side. Shouldn't be telling you this, but maybe not enough. But anyhow, it was a fun place to work. Like I say, my main job was a head saw operator at the rail mill, which they didn't show a whole lot of video of the rail mill, but that was a noisy ear protection helmet, and it was good. Ron Lowell was a train operator. He could take the big old cement, or a big old magnet, he could set it on a cart egg without breaking it. That's how smooth operator, remember Ron? He was very...
Ear protection they gave you at the railroad was a lot of cotton.
Cotton.
Cigarette filters were.
I enjoyed working with all the group. I recognize a lot of people here, so thank you.
I don't know if I should say this with Jim Zingler here or not. I don't want to get anybody in trouble. But one of my other memories was back in the 70s after I'll take the 70s, early 80s I think it was, when the frog shop was still there. I had built my new home and I needed clothesline poles out back. And I don't remember who the gentleman was, but it was somebody in the frog shop that built me a pair of clothesline poles, and I have them to this day.
Well, that was a nice service they provided. Okay, I'm going to hit this side over here. If there's anybody that would like to share something about their time working for the shops. Anybody over here like to share anything about, or if your parents did, and that, or if your father did, or anybody else up here? Because here's the good news, is that you don't have to leave right away. In fact, for those of you that brought something, we have it up in front to look at and talk about. We have blueprints of the yard up there that were provided. We have a set from Mike Gershly, we have a set from Jim Zingler, and we have some other items from scrapbooks to look at, Jerry Journey's scrapbook he created, as well as other things. And so again, I would encourage you to come and take a look at it, and don't be put off if I come around and take pictures of you guys talking.